Mitochondria are the little energy packages within the cells. They've got a long history. They really go back to the origins of complex life 2 billion years ago, where one complex bacteria engulfed another. And then over 2 billion years, those have evolved into free-living, semi-autonomous little packages within our cells. And every cell in our body has them, except for our red cells, which don't have a nucleus. But where the whole of our body energy is driven by these little packages that pump out a molecule called ATP, which is really stored energy that we use for all sorts of purposes. 80% of the body's energy is produced by the brain, or is used by the brain and by the muscles. And the brain has a very constant use of that day and night, and your muscles, of course, use it when they need it. So, yeah, mitochondria are pretty important organelles, and we've been interested in them for quite some years now, probably for about a decade.
That sounds quite recent, though, for something that, as you say, is fundamental, a building block of who we are.
Yeah, there was, I guess mitochondria were discovered 100, 150 years ago, and there wasn't a lot of interest in them until we came to the point where we understood what they did within the cell, and they were the energy generators, and that was maybe 50 years ago. And then there was quite a lot of interest, but it was around that time that molecular biology became a focus, and everything began to focus on the gene. Now, there was a guy called Otto Warburg, who was a Nobel Prize winner back in the 1930s, who had claimed and had a lot of evidence that these mitochondria, or damage to these mitochondria, was quite central to cancer and to other diseases as well. But he was particularly working with cancer. And it got some traction for a while, but really didn't go anywhere. And then molecular biology took over, and we discovered that cancer was underpinned by genetic changes. But he still grabbed onto this idea that it was very much a mitochondrial damage. And now the circle has gone a full circle, and we're beginning to understand that mitochondrial damage is quite central to cancer, and we're beginning to probe a little bit more deeply into why this is and how this plays out in terms of cancer biology.
So when we're talking damage, are we talking beyond ageing? I mean, ageing would cause damage. Is that the most common?
Yeah, ageing contributes, of course, with time changes, single base changes occur within. Mitochondria have their own small genome. It's a little circular genome, much smaller than a bacterial genome. It has its own control mechanisms, and it encodes just 13 proteins and some components of the protein synthetic machinery within the mitochondria, within these little packages in cells. So there can be damage and accumulated damage. There are repair mechanisms, but as we age, we get more damage in our mitochondrial DNA.
Is it just damage from aging, though, or are there other causes of damage?
There are probably a whole lot of lipids get damaged, proteins get damaged, structures get damaged. The processes for turning over or maintaining mitochondria will get damaged or change or slow down with age. So, yeah, aging is an integrated, complex process that a lot of people are trying to work on to try and get more healthy aging at the moment. But
is that your area of interest, or is it a different?
Not so much in aging, but in understanding mitochondria and understanding what's going on in the body with regard to, in particular, tumour development, with regard to brain function. We're really just on the edge of pushing into that area to try and begin to understand more about mitochondria in the brain. And of course the brain is very complex, and it's connected to your central nervous system, which is connected to your peripheral nervous system, and all of these, or most of the cells in your brain's central and peripheral nervous system last a lifetime. So each cell in your body will last for 70 or 80 years. Most of the other cells in your body turn over within months, weeks or months sometimes. So you've got to have very different mechanisms for maintaining brain cells, and in fact many muscle cells as well will be quite long-lived, many months if not years, and so they need to be maintained, and the mitochondria are certainly part of the maintenance system within the tissues of the body.
Well, you mentioned tumours, though, and brain tumours, of course. I mean, devastating condition to have. And so I've known instances of it myself from friends, just suddenly someone's gone, brain tumour gone. So is this still a condition we know quite little about?
Well, brain tumours we know quite a bit. I mean, we know quite a lot about the biology of tumours. It's just that each tumour is different and the biology is complicated. So given that each tumour in each individual is different, and the tumours, of course, evolve, they're not static. So they're changing all the time. So within any one individual, you might be talking about a range of different diseases in terms of the progression of that disease, and a number of different approaches that might be used at different stages of progression. So when cancer is first diagnosed, surgery might be the initial option, and then if it is found to have moved away from the primary site, then other options play in, and of course radiation and chemotherapy are the two big players in the game, but more and more now using the body's immune system, the natural processes you have that would normally keep that cancer under control, but because of stress, because of a whole range of things, including because the tumour might be suppressing your immune system, it doesn't work properly, it doesn't do its job, and so you need to be able to work out how and why the tumour is suppressing the immune system, and then move on to doing something about it in terms of therapy. And that's where the big breakthroughs in cancer treatment have come over the last 5 or 10 years.
And mitochondria has a role to play in that?
Mitochondria are part of that system, but the understanding the role of mitochondria in cancer and in the immune system, and working out how to rebalance those settings in the tumour and in your immune system are really those areas of intervention are really at a very early stage. So in the past we've used pretty much blunderbuss approaches to treat cancer. In other words, we use what are called cytotoxics, things that will kill dividing cells. Unfortunately for us, they also kill your immune system, and any proliferating cell in the body, the lining of your gut, your blood-producing cells will be affected by most cytotoxic drugs. And so you need to be able to be a bit more nuanced, I think, in the way you treat cancers, and certainly we have moved on to think of a new dimension, a new way of treating cancers as being very much using your body to fight the cancer. And to do that, it's best probably to use these cytotoxic drugs in a very careful way so that they generate immune responses rather than killing off your immune response against the cancer.
Is there anything that we can do to promote mitochondrial health?
Mitochondrial health, of course, is the big question at the moment, is how to maintain. But it's not just maintaining mitochondrial health, and of course maintaining a nice, robust mitochondrial genome that is very important in the energy balance in the body, is as important as maintaining a robust genome that's in the nucleus of your cells, so that's your main genetic material. But treatments are beginning to be used now that begin to manipulate the energy balance within your cells and particularly within your mitochondria. And we've been working with an extreme model where we actually knock out the mitochondrial genome. That's the DNA within the mitochondria. Just 16,000 bases as compared with 3 billion base pairs in the nucleus and just 13 protein encoding genes as opposed to 22,000 in your nucleus.
So quite basic in some ways.
Quite primitive, quite basic. Of course, it used to be much bigger, perhaps a few million bases, but over a long period we have evolved to generate a very efficient energy producing system that can be balanced, that has its own way of talking to the rest of the cell and to the rest of the body. And so this plays out in terms of a whole different biology and a whole different way of thinking about treatment of cancer. So we knock out the mitochondrial genome, and then, for example, in a tumour cell that might represent damage from cytotoxic drugs or from radiation or other insults that the cell might get. And then we pop those cells back into an animal and ask, will that tumour grow? And our big contribution 5 years ago was to show that the tumour wouldn't grow unless it picked up mitochondria with mitochondrial DNA from another cell, from a normal cell in the body. So the tumour was essentially interacting with its environment to enable mitochondria, these energy packages, to move into the cell to replace the damaged mitochondria. So this was a completely new way of thinking about cells in the body, that they could actually transfer DNA between cells, and sure, they transfer it within these little packages called mitochondria, but this is horizontal gene transfer that is occurring in the body. We don't know how extensively it's occurring, but we do know that it can occur and does occur under some disease situations, and particularly in cancer.
Well, you had that breakthrough 5 years ago. What is going to be the focus of your attention in 2019?
Our big interest there is to understand early events in tumour development. So our particular models are quite good because they enable you to watch very carefully a long 3-week process where cells adjust to picking up mitochondria or to re-establishing the energy systems and the energy balance within the body. And tumours are not just tumour cells, not just cancer cells. So some tumours can be 50-70% normal cells in the body. So there are immune cells, there are other cells we call stromal cells, which maintain the cancer cells. They generate all the connective tissues. So if you take surgically remove a tumour, it will stay as a round. It doesn't just blob out and disappear as a monolayer. So there's structure, there's structural components, and all of those are very important for maintaining the tumour. And they also have a lot of vasculature that develops. Not normal vasculature, it's quite leaky, but it develops. And so there are a lot of cells, a lot of structures that are not cancer cells. And the cancer cells themselves are able to orchestrate these cells to support their growth.
So the body doesn't realise that the assistance that it's giving to tumours is actually ultimately going to
Well, it doesn't realise it from that point of view, no. They respond to stimuli, cells in the body, and it's the connectedness of all the cells in our body that allows us to interpret as thinking, is responding as purpose behind.
And the tumour is manipulating.
Yes,
that.
And it manipulates, as I mentioned, the immune system. So when a tumour starts to grow, there might be some inflammatory cells come along, and those might actually stimulate the growth of the tumour. But then those inflammatory cells will and in response to interactions with the tumour, will recruit in immune cells, or maybe the cells we call macrophages, and sometimes those will suppress the immune system, so your immune system doesn't work properly. And there's a big science now that has evolved around understanding exactly how this process works, what stops your immune system. Now, your immune system's pretty powerful. I just did a back-of-the-envelope calculation and about how long it would take and how massive is the production of immune cells. So if you give a maximum stimulation, it might be a bacterial infection, but you really get your immune system hyped up. So the T cells and all of the immune cells start dividing in about 6 or 7 hours. Most tumour cells might take 15 or 20 hours, and other cells in your body can take weeks to days to divide. But the immune cells actually divide very quickly, and they divide at such a rate that if it wasn't controlled, you would have more immune cells responding to what the stimulus is than you have cells in your body within 2 weeks. So
they've got to be kept in check.
Yeah, they have to be kept in check. And that's true of all immune responses. So immune responses will go up, and then you'll have negative checkpoint control mechanisms that bring the tumour or bring the immune system back to normal again. So within 2 or 3 weeks, you've completely controlled that immune response. This whole area of immune checkpoint and immunotherapy, it essentially was recognised as the number one breakthrough in the whole of science throughout the world, and certainly in Science magazine in 2013. We've been working in that space, but most of our immunotherapy work has been with cell-based therapies, and more recently you've probably heard about the CAR T-cell therapies, which are both are cell therapies, but one of them involves taking people's own immune cells out, which are potentially able to generate an immune response, and genetically engineering them to recognise the tumour, expanding them and putting those cells back in the patient. So there are various iterations of this CAR T-cell therapy that have developed over 5-7 years, and we'll be working with a Chinese group to apply one of these. We can do that because we have the GMP facilities at our institute, at the Malian Institute, that enable us to push ahead with human vaccines, genetically engineered human vaccines that will benefit patients, and to test them out in patients. So yeah, we've been working in animal models with the checkpoint inhibitors. We're working with the CAR T-cell therapy. We've also been working with what is called some dendritic cell vaccines. Vaccines are not always therapies, but you can have therapeutic vaccines. You can give vaccines after the person gets the disease, and so it becomes a therapeutic vaccine. I don't think we have enough information at the moment to vaccinate anyone against cancer, other than perhaps viral cancers, where we've got the a number of vaccines that are effective against some of the viruses that are known to cause cancer. But those are
that's the dream, though, Mike, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's the dream, is to have a vaccine or a treatment or a prevention even rather than a cure. Yeah,
but then I think you don't really know, because every cancer is different. The combination of changes, of genetic changes, is enormous, even for one cancer. And so trying to generate a vaccine that might have, in the case of melanoma, hundreds or thousands of what are called these neoantigens, or slightly different proteins, becomes increasingly complex, but is something that there are a number of groups around the world working on. So people are very interested in, if you're in a high-risk group, or if you're inherited certain genes and have a high probability of getting the disease, then of vaccination may be a possibility, but certainly not in the near future. I think cancer's still, even though it's a common disease in terms of cancer, it's relatively rare in terms of individual cancers. And of course, this problem of each individual cancer being an evolving tissue and changing with time means that whatever you throw at it, it usually finds a way around that. But if you're doing it in an immunological context, your immune system, hopefully, as the cancer evolves, recognises what those differences are as they evolve and generates immune responses against them. And then, of course, if the tumour suppresses the immune response, you've got other tools that can unblock that suppression and get your immune system working again. So it's all a big swings and roundabouts with great potential. I mean, people are very excited about the possibility and the fact that you can virtually bring people back to life, even though it is only a relatively small percentage, 20 or 30%, means that it's really worthwhile investing in this area and opening up or exploring the possibilities of improving and getting up above that threshold of, say, 50 or 60% cure, when it would come in as being a standard therapy for everyone